So the main purpose of today's show is to talk about what's been going on in Western Asia. A lot of people are talking about this, obviously, because there's been a lot of coverage of it on the news in the past week. Obviously want to make it clear that when I say we're going to be talking about this because of recent events, we're very much aware that this is something that's been going on for a very long time. Henceforth, why we're going to be providing a lot of historical context on how we got to here. I should say, like, if you don't know what I'm talking about the violence that is currently taking place in Palestine and Israel. I want to also kickstart by saying that, obviously, in light of these recent events, charities that monitor these things have seen a rise in both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So obviously want to say both of those never okay. We shouldn't be seeing that in retaliation to this, whatever your views are. And solidarity to both the Jewish and the Islamic communities around the world that are watching in horror at what is going on, or have been watching what's been happening for the past couple of decades. But yeah, just want to say we are in no way condoning violence. We support the Palestinian right to liberation, but we are not condoning violence in any way, so please do not construe our words. Also, if you go and listen to this on socials, it's very likely that we obviously will have clipped things down, and you might see things without this context in there. So yeah, please, we are not in any way trying to push for the killing or hate towards any group.
It's a very it's very treacherous territory when we discuss this, because obviously the fallout of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism that we've been seeing, especially in the past week. However, we are going to be taking a strictly factual approach. The only time we're going to be discussing anything of our kind of own reflections is right at the end. But otherwise, it's a completely factual approach. This is not, this is not me making things up and saying things from my own opinion.
Yeah, I mean, one final thing just as well is just to say, I've heard stories of people from both the Jewish and Muslim communities that have people are missing. They don't know where they are. It's obviously a very scary time for anyone who has any kind of connection to this area. So incredibly sorry for anyone that is going through anything result of this. And with that being said, we're going to kick off things by just having a bit of a conversation and providing a bit of historical context as to how we've actually got to this point in regards to Palestine within Israel and tensions between the two.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't actually understand the kind of wide history of it. So I'm going to try, to the best of my ability, to give a very comprehensive but also succinct history of everything, because obviously it's it's not even 75 years, it's centuries, millennia long history that we can't possibly sit and kind of go through the entire complexities of in the space of 45 minutes. So I'm going to try to just kind of give the main points. Firstly, I'm going to start with kind of clarifying the fact that Judaism is a ethno-religion. So it's a little bit of a unique kind of concept, I guess, for in the wider understanding of ethnicity and religion, where they're two separate things. Your ethnicity is kind of the country and the culture that you're from. Your religion is the faith system that you adhere to. However, Judaism is what we call an ethno-religion, where your ethnicity and your religion are both Jewish, essentially. So this story goes all the way back to the prehistoric times, when Prophet Abraham, who is the patriarch of Judaism, founded or came across the land of Canaan, and obviously kind of set up shop there, created the Jewish kind of faith. And then his grandson Jacob then went over to Egypt, set up his family there. Centuries of Jewish people were living there. Obviously, then they faced tyranny by the pharaohs, and then the prophet Moses led them in their mass exodus from Egypt back into Canaan. And Canaan is essentially what we refer to as an ancient civilization that housed a number of ancient Jewish smaller civilizations and empires and communities. And that area, like all areas of the world at the time, but I guess particularly that area, faced a lot of kind of invasion and conquest and push and pull. Empires growing and expanding and taking and conceding to each other. So I think there was kind of attacks from Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, everything. And as this is going on, as this kind of history and this period of like war and conquest and all of that is going on, obviously the Jewish people who are on this land are they're either like changing religions, or they're leaving that land to go and settle elsewhere in the world, until eventually we have the Jewish-Roman Wars, which was kind of like saw the mass expulsion of the Jewish population out of Canaan, then into the rest of the world, largely kind of Europe, North Africa, and parts of the Arab world. And that is what most historians and most people posit as the creation of the Jewish diaspora. It was that kind of final expulsion as a result of the Jewish-Roman Wars. The Jewish people then obviously settled, as I said, largely over Europe and North Africa and parts of the Arab world, and that became the Jewish diaspora. And for centuries then they kind of, this is like 2,000 years ago, by the way, that we're talking, that's when the expulsion was. So then for the past kind of like 2,000 years they've been settled in these lands and they've been living in these lands. However, they always had in their head the idea of returning to their Jewish homeland. In the Jewish faith, there's this concept of like the promised land, which is essentially a divine promise that God gave to Abraham and his descendants and their descendants, that this land, what was historically Canaan, is kind of they have a right to it as their like special Jewish homeland. And that idea, the idea of a Jewish homeland and the promise of return, essentially forms the central tenet of what is Zionism. Zionism is the political appendage, the political platform of Judaism that basically strives for this Jewish homeland. Now, there have been, through centuries, the past few centuries, there have been kind of Zionist appeals to various kind of leaders from various areas of the world where the Jewish people were living. And then I think Zionism saw a real rise in the 19th century as more time because of a result of growing anti-Semitism in kind of, largely Europe, but obviously other parts of the world as well. And Zionist leaders were in talks over a long period of time with European leaders over where can we have as our Jewish homeland, basically. And they went through a process where they were proposing and kind of teasing out ideas of perhaps having creating Israel in places like Kenya, Uganda, Crimea, Australia, even Cyprus. However, their intended site was always on Palestine because that was their historically Canaan, right? And then obviously after the Holocaust, that was kind of like the final like catalyst, I would say. And then as a result of that, the Western leaders, the UN, they essentially then created the Jewish state land, which was in 1948. Now, this seems like a pretty straightforward history. Like, okay, they were expelled and they had their historic homeland and then they went back. However, that would be it if what then became to be Israel was just an empty land with no one living on it. Unfortunately, it wasn't the case. What actually happened was that the land that was given was Palestine. So to kind of tell you the other side of the story, we go back again into the Iron Ages, 2,000 years ago, where there was a period of like conquest and empires coming in and out and in and out and in and out. There was this kind of drip exodus of Jewish people, and also a conversion of Jewish people to other faiths, including that of like Christianity and Islam. And basically the kind of Zionist historiography says that after the mass exodus, the mass exile of the Jewish people from Canaan, or around the same time, was the Arab conquest, like Arab invasions. And as a result of those Arab invasions, obviously the Arab people came and they settled on this land, and they now are what we know to be Palestinians. So they came there as this conquest, Arab conquest, all the way back in the 1st till the 7th century. However, that's not entirely true. Yes, it's true that there are factions of Palestinian population who can trace their kind of ancestry back to, the Arab conquest and all of that. However, the full truth, what the full picture is, that there are a number of Jewish people who actually, as I say, converted to religions such as Christianity and Islam, following the kind of the exchanges of empire. And a lot of Palestinians today are actually descended from those Jewish people who were kind of native to Canaan all the way kind of two millennia ago. That's what the history is, right?
Yeah, it makes sense, because I think even outside of Palestine, Judaism is the oldest Abrahamic religion, right? And
absolutely,
both of them, Christianity and Islam, come from it.
So the way the kind of Zionist historiography is, they kind of make very discrete circles of this history where you actually can't do that. It's not that this was a standalone population and this was a one-time event. The Exodus was a one-time or a two-time event, and then there was like a discrete population that then moved in. It does not happen like that. These changing of demographics, these changing hands of power are in constant flux. They are constantly fluctuating, and you cannot trace it to be a complete circle in each instance. It doesn't work like that. It's not a simple case of one population left because one population invaded. It's an exchange. These cultures and these empires and these demographics and these religions are constantly lending and borrowing and taking and giving to each other, so to be able to draw a discrete circle in that history is very, very inaccurate in the first instance. Nevertheless, it is the case that the vast majority of the Jewish people had obviously dispersed across Europe and Africa and parts of the Arab world, and that it was now then a large Arab Muslim population in that historical Canaan land, and they basically fell under the hands of numerous Arab empires, eventually falling under Ottoman rule for a number of centuries. And then it brings us into modern history, which is now the First World War, where there's a number of native Arab, like Palestinian, revolts against the Ottoman rule and the British kind of colony of Egypt nearby. Now, Britain say to the Palestinians, if you lot kick out the Ottomans and you gain your independence, we will honor that independence. And that's exactly what the Palestinians do. They kick out the Ottomans. We see the end of the Ottoman Empire. However, instead of honoring Palestinian independence like the Brits say that they would, instead what they do is they make Palestine their own colony. But before that happens, as I was saying, this is now where those two histories kind of really meet. They're running parallel, they're intertwined, and they're running parallel this whole time. And now in 1917 is where they come face to face, this Jewish history and this Arab history. Why? Because in 1917, Britain released what we know to be the Balfour Declaration, which is essentially the British state saying that if the Jewish people want Palestine to be their Jewish homeland, then we support that and we will give the resources to help that happen, basically. And this is, as I said, before the Holocaust. Even the Holocaust was the kind of final catalyst. It is still during a time of, as I say, anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish pogroms, which are obviously disgusting and abhorrent. So I understand the kind of Jewish strive for, their own homeland.
From what you've said, it does seem that a lot of Zionist sentiment is rooted in ultimately just fear of ethnic cleansing and erasure of the Jewish.
I think that came to be later on. However, it's more theological, because for them it's a covenant that God made with them, basically. Be in exile and then I will give you this homeland. That's central to the Jewish faith. That's kind of where that Jewish idea of a homeland comes from. And then Zionism is the articulation and the ventriloquization of anti-Semitic fears, basically. So in 1917, the British basically stabbed the Palestinians, where they say, well, we'll honor your independence. Actually, what they do is they release the Balfour Declaration. And then in 1922, they officially make Palestine a British colony under the Mandate for Palestine, which was mandated by the League of Nations, which was basically the kind of the proto-UN before the UN officially came to be. And for 20 years, then, so between 1922 till 1947, there's this back and forth fighting, Arab revolts, British control, blah, 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 blah. In 1947, the British finally kind of announced their intentions to cancel the British Mandate for Palestine. And in 1948, they do exactly that. And instead, they create the Israeli nation. Now, obviously, you're wondering, how does this work? How are they now going to take this whole population and put it into this land that is already Palestine and there's already people there, blah, 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 blah. So that's where the UN come in, and the UN create the partition plan, which is essentially they split up this land that was Palestine, and they create two states: the Israeli state for the Jewish homeland, and the Palestinian state for the population that are all the Arab Muslim population that are, well, largely Muslim, not entirely, population that are already there. And what's actually funny is that 62% of the land was given to the Israeli state, despite the population, the number of Palestinians being twice as high as the Jewish population, right? That was in the UN plan. Now, obviously, as a result of that, Palestine rejected that proposal. That, you know, it's not fair, it's not a equal stratification of land, it's not a proportionate stratification of land. The Israeli state ostensibly accepted it. I say ostensibly, which means to say that they seemed like they accepted it. Obviously, the partition plan gave them more land, but as a result of that, as a result of Israel declaring their independence in 1948, there was a number of Arab-Israeli wars, because surrounding Arab nations, Jordan, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, invaded Palestinian land. There was the first Arab-Israeli war, there was a second Arab-Israeli war. Jordan and Egypt took control of what was the Palestinian territories. Eventually, after the third Arab-Israeli war, I think in 1967, which was known as the Six-Day War, Israel regained control of those Palestinian territories, and essentially that's now what we know to be the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, right? However, in doing so, when they took control, they dishonored the agreement of the UN partition plan. So basically, not only did they initially have 62% of the land, they then took a further 60%.
So 60% of that 40%.
Of that. This kind of event marked as what we now know to be the Nakba, which is the kind of in Arabic, the catastrophe, where 80% of Palestinians, 700,000 Palestinians, fled Palestine, on the caveat that they're not allowed to return. And to this day, they have not been able to. And in the same time that this is all happening, in the immediate kind of, in the few years before and after and during the Israeli independence, equal numbers of Jewish people who form the diaspora have now moved into Israel. So now, basically, what the situation is, there's Palestinian territories, Gaza Strip, West Bank, and Israel are basically the administrative power. They continue to expand into those territories, and obviously that forms kind of Palestinian resistance organizations, the biggest one being the Palestinian Liberation Organization, who obviously they're fighting for Palestinian self-determination. Eventually in 1993, the Oslo Accords are signed, which basically allowed them, the Palestinians, to have interim authority over the Gaza Strip and West Bank until a more permanent solution was agreed. So that was kind of, the Oslo Accords were, I would say, the watershed treaty, and it was supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to be, okay, you guys have interim control over your governments, and we're going to think of a more permanent solution. However, a more permanent solution has not been reached. Actually, what has happened is a period of occupation that we will kind of now go to talk about. But as a result of that, then Hamas was created in 1987 during the first Intifada. Intifada basically just means uprising, and it was a number. There have been like 2-3 intifadas in Palestinian history from the Palestinian side, which is basically uprising. The first one was in 1987, where Hamas was created, and the second one was between 2000 and 2005. So Hamas come into being in 1987. The genealogy of Hamas is that they were a Islamic charity, essentially, and then they became kind of a militant group fighting, like literally physically fighting for Palestinian independence. And then obviously throughout the years, they have kind of leaned more and more into Islamist ideologies. And then in 2007, Hamas gained complete control over the Gaza Strip. So as I said, Palestine, the Palestinian occupied territories are made up of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. The West Bank is the larger one. Now, that takes us to where we are today. I will go into more detail of the occupation, but essentially that takes us to where we are today. Now, on the 7th of October, a week ago today, In a sneak attack, Hamas broke through Gaza's barriers, they took hostages, they attacked military bases, and they killed civilians. All the statistics that I'm given have been fact-checked as of like last night, the 13th of October. So on the 7th of October, Hamas obviously had their sneak attack onto Israeli civilization and military bases, and the current death toll currently stands at 1,300 Israeli people that were killed. Now, here we interject to say that obviously it goes without saying, any loss of civilian life in any conflict by any perpetrator on any side is first and foremost a tragedy. Even in Islamic warfare, there are very, very specific rules that God gives us that states the kind of parameters of war, and the indiscriminate death of kind of civilians, including women and children, is not allowed, right? So we that's a blanket condemnation, and kind of that's where the media frenzy has been, right? In this media coverage of what has been going on in this war right now, the media have been absolutely hyper-fixated on, we need to condemn Hamas, we need to stop Hamas, we need to blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, we've condemned them now. Say, for example, we completely annihilate Hamas and Hamas cease to exist. That doesn't stop the occupation, and that doesn't stop the context in which Hamas came to be. The best way I can explain it is that people are trying to read a story from the middle of the book. People are entering this history on chapter 15 out of 30. Say, for example, if I reached over and I smacked Carlos now, everyone at home is going to be like, why on earth did you do that? That's so bad. He's such a victim. However, if I turn around and I say to you, actually, the truth is, Carlos has been hitting me, not just with his hand, but with a metal rod every single week. I mean, I think the reaction would be very different. It changes the entire narrative. It changes the whole story, right? That's the bit that we need to focus on. What Hamas did on the 7th of October when they killed all of those civilians was what they believed to be an appropriate retaliation. Now, the appropriate part of that sentiment is what we contest, is what we condemn. We don't believe it's appropriate to just be indiscriminately killing civilians. The retaliation part of it now is actually what people need to focus on and what people are not focusing on. Because once you realize that it was a retaliation, now there's a whole genealogy to this war, to this issue, to this conflict. I don't agree with the word conflict, but I'll use it for ease of conversation. Now there's a whole genealogy to it. Now there's a lineage to it. Now you're able to situate it in a historical context. Now it's not just a Hamas woke up one random day and just decided off their own whims that they're just going to murder indiscriminately. That's not what happened. Once again, not to justify it, but that's not the full story. I'm going to speak now about the occupation. So I've obviously spoken about how Israeli came into independence in 1948, how they then, basically became administrators of the Palestinian territories officially in 1967. Now, obviously, as I said, they took 60% of that Palestinian land, right? By the way, this is now a story of 75 years. When I say that people, the Western media especially, are coming in and they're entering the story halfway through, what I'm now going to tell you is that genealogy. And what I'm now going to try to explain to you guys is the 75 years that preceded what happened on the 7th of October. In 1967, when Israel kind of became victorious in the final Arab-Israeli war, they took 60% of Palestinian land and claimed it as Israel. That goes against the agreements of the UN partition plan, which already saw them have a disproportionate amount of land in the first place. Gaza Strip, to this day, is one of the most densely populated places on earth, with around 2 million people crammed in a 140 square mile territory. 70% of them come from displaced people from 1948. Nearly 50%, or I think might just be over 50% of Gazans are children, are under 18. That's 1 million people who are currently living under Gaza are under 18.
I think I saw a percentage that was like 48% are under 14. So like, especially
children,
young,
babies, not just under 18, babies, right? Cool. There is a ongoing sea, air, land blockade of Gaza Strip and the West Bank by Israel and Egypt. Gazans are forbidden from leaving Gaza. Gazans are forbidden from operating any airport or any seaport from Gaza. Israel restricts the entry and the exit of goods. Israel controls the Palestinian population registry and Palestinian infrastructure. So there's routine bombings because this is an ongoing back and forth. And then they'll bomb Gaza and the West Bank to the ground, and then they will not allow for materials to pass through the Gazan border in order to rebuild infrastructure. So it's a bomb site, essentially. It's just one big bomb site. There is basically little to no travel between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip and the West Bank are basically separated territories, even though they are supposed to be considered as one territorial unit. And Israel, because they control both territories, they do not allow any freedom of movement between the two territories. They do not allow anyone from the Gaza Strip to the West Bank and vice versa. Under the Oslo Accords, they are supposed to be considered one territorial unit, but they're completely separated. So now Palestinians in the West Bank who have family members in the Gaza Strip, they can't see them. There's people who haven't seen their brothers, their spouses, their parents, their children, because Israel does not allow for freedom of movement. Israel is control of the healthcare system, the education system, the commercial industry, every single industry, the employment industry, everything, right? Israel promised 2,000 work permits for Gazans to work in Israel, but actually they only issued somewhere in the region of 9,000. And even then, freedom in and out, what little movement there is in and out of those borders is heavily restricted, those checkpoints. And we will come to talk about that kind of violence later on. So, but once again, this is not my telling of the story. These are factual. The UN states that there are 81% of Gazans who are currently living in poverty, with 63% suffering from food insecurity. Bearing in mind that we've just said 48% of Gazans are under 14, over 50% of them children. Water consumption by Israel is at least 4 times that of the Palestinians in the occupied territories. So Israel has water for swimming pools, to water their plants, to water their lawns, to make water fountains, whereas Palestinians get only the amount of water that Israel allows them to have, which is restricted. There are 48,488 Palestinian homes that have been demolished by illegal settlements, compared to 0 Israeli homes that have been demolished by Palestine. By the way, they don't have any institutional power. They don't have any official military. They don't have any of that. Whatever, they are technically a nation state. The UN recognizes Palestine as a nation state, but all the things that make a nation state, Palestine do not have. They don't have a formalized, institutionally recognized government with any real institutional power. They don't have a military. They don't have any access in and out of their territories, whether it's by land or by sea or by air. And they don't even have control of their own territories, right? There are 6,279 Palestinian political prisoners compared to 0 Israeli political prisoners. This, by the way, is before the 7th of October. I'm trying to give you the kind of the context, the story. I'm setting the landscape for what led to the 7th of October. So there are over 65 laws that discriminate against Palestinians, and there are over 593 Israeli checkpoints and roadblocks, heavily restricting movement in and out of any of the Palestinian territories. The employment rate is 47%, and access to clean water and electricity remains inaccessible at crisis levels. Now, I say crisis levels because that is the wording used by the Human Rights Watch, a universal organization. A little bit more context. When we say that Israel have taken Palestinian land and they're expanding into Palestinian land, is what we call settler colonialism. I'm sure everyone knows that what colonialism is. It's kind of like a foreign entity coming over, seizing control of a territory and population that basically isn't theirs. Settler colonialism is when the colonizer then settles on that land, on the colony land that they've seized. And as I say, there have been a number, I'll tell you the figure in a bit, there have been a number of Israeli illegal, as in the internationally illegal settlements on Palestinian land. And obviously that then causes the demolition of Palestinian homes, the displacement of Palestinian people. And as a result of it, what we have seen is unimaginable settler violence. So the Israelis that are coming in and settling in these settlements, they have enacted a system, a whole apparatus of settler violence. There's a UN report that found that the annual rate of settler attacks has almost quadrupled between 2006 and 2014. That was the most recent figure I could find. I'm sure it's way more now. That's a small indication of what has been proliferating over the years. The Human Rights Watch reports on physical violence against Palestinians by settlers, including, and I quote in brackets because I'm reading from their report, frequently stoning and shooting at Palestinian cars. In many cases, settlers abuse Palestinians in front of Israeli soldiers or police with little interference from the authorities. There is a Israeli organization that basically documents Israeli kind of violence against the Palestinian. It's called BT Salem. Is basically B Committee Salem. If anyone wants to go, they have like figures, facts, everything, statistics. So they say that settler actions include, and again I quote, blocking roadways so as to impede Palestinian life and commerce. The settlers also shoot solar panels on roofs of buildings. They torch automobiles, shatter window panes and windshields, destroy crops, uproot trees, abuse merchants and owners of stalls in the market. Some of these actions are intended to force Palestinians to leave their homes and farmland and thereby enable the settlers to gain control of them. Now, the UN report has found that roughly 10 to 11,000 Palestinians have been killed since 2000 as a result of this conflict, and the comparison is that between 1,000 to 1,500 Israelis have been killed, and this is not including the recent fatalities, by the way. So this is before 7th of October since 2000. So that's not even going all the way back to 1948 and all the Arab-Israeli wars. That's just since 2000, between 10 to 11,000 Palestinians and 1 to 1,500 Israelis. Now, the United Nations describes the occupied territory as a, I quote, chronic humanitarian crisis. Amnesty International have called it, I quote, rampant discrimination, that Israel have inflicted immense suffering on Palestinians, depriving them of their basic rights. The UN also states, and I quote, from 2012 to 2022, the population of Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, had grown from 5,200,000 to over 700,000. These settlers lived illegally in 279 Israeli settlements across the occupied West Bank, including 14 settlements in occupied East Jerusalem, with a total population of more than 229,000 people. And at least 147 of these settlements were outposts, which means that they are illegal even under Israeli domestic law. The international community considers this establishment of Israeli settlements in the occupied territories to be illegal on the basis that they are violating Article 49 of the 4th Geneva Convention. So this is not my opinion. This is international law. The UN report further documents correlation between settler expansion and settler violence against the Palestinian people. In the past decade, the UN had verified 3,372 violent incidents by settlers, injuring 1,222 Palestinians. Last year, settler violence reached the highest levels ever recorded by the UN, and Israel has failed to investigate and prosecute crimes against those settlers. Now, that's kind of where that was a lot. That was a lot to keep up with. And by the way, guys, this is still surface level. Everything that I have said is still very surface level. If you actually look, so what this is apartheid, right? For those of you who don't know, apartheid is basically a kind of system in which on the same land there's two demographics of people, and both demographics are living under two systems, two political systems, two judicial systems, two moral systems, and that's what the Palestinian territories have been made by Israel. It's apartheid, where the Israeli people on the Israeli land and even on the occupied Palestinian lands are able to enjoy freedom of movement, all Jewish people from across the world, whether they are practicing Jewish or not, simply need some kind of distant ancestry to a Jewish person. They have what we call birthright citizenship. They have the right to return to Israel. They have passports. They can come and go anytime out of Israel. It's a thriving economy. Meanwhile, Palestine, on the same land that is administered by Israel, as I just explained, are living in absolute dire humanitarian crisis, as stated. Like the UN and Amnesty have called it unlivable conditions. Various human rights reports have called Gaza a open air prison, which is exactly what it is. They cannot leave. They do not control their own destiny. It is what you call an open air prison. It is the single-handedly largest open air prison in the world. None of this is my opinion. None of this is my own reflection. None of this is my own sentiment. Everything that I have just told you for the last 10 minutes is fact. These are verified by the UN, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, various human rights organizations across the world. That's basically been the situation on the ground for Palestinians, for Gazans at large. So that's the context, really. That's the context that led to the 7th of October. Thus, the Gazans have been living under siege. They have been living under a system of apartheid, and it is genocide. It is genocide, where you have a whole demographic of people who you are systematically displacing and murdering. That is what we call genocide. Mm-hmm. And it has been an ongoing system of genocide since the creation of the Israeli state.
And I think that it's, like I say, it's been ongoing, and for anyone that's wanted to actually go and like see it for themselves, it's very obvious. But now, the past week, obviously more attention has been drawn to this area, to this issue, and yet we are now seeing even more plain sight, like completely unafraid, unashamed, like
they've just completely upped the ante now. Like it's and we'll discuss this, but essentially what I really wanted to do was paint the picture of what has been going on for the past 75 years for those of you who have opened the page in the middle of the book and think that what Hamas did on the 7th of October was just a completely unprovoked attack. That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing unprovoked, right? I'm seeing that I'm hearing Western media report it as this was a completely unprovoked attack. No, it wasn't. As we said, we don't believe it was appropriate. We don't justify the killing of civilians, but to say that it was unprovoked is a fallacious lie. It is a retaliation. Whether or not you think it's acceptable or appropriate, you cannot deny the fact that it is a retaliation to 75 years of ongoing settler colonialism, of apartheid, of genocide, of ethnic cleansing. So the conversation I want to have now, right, is, okay, we've stood here and repeatedly we've said we don't condone what Hamas have done. We don't condone the loss of civilian life on either side. So what now? What now? And that's the thing that that's the conversation that needs to be had and that people aren't having. Say tomorrow you completely annihilate Hamas to the ground. Hamas ceases to exist. The settler colonialism is still going on. The genocide is still going on. Apartheid is still going on. So what now? And I want to talk about Hamas, right? Let's talk about Hamas. I hate the fact that we have to sit here and we have to now quantify and compare and blah, 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 but we have to. We have to, because the narrative is wrong and the narrative is false and the narrative mandates the further genocide of the Palestinian people. So as a result of that, we have to sit here now and we have to talk numerically. The loss of Palestinian life over the past 75 years has been seismically much higher than the loss of Israeli life. And yes, every one of those 1,500 lives that were civilians is a tragedy. However, to act as though it's on the same playing field as 10 to 11,000 Palestinian lives is insane. It's crazy. People acting as though there's any kind of symmetry between the Palestinian resistance, whether it's the PLO, whether it's Hamas and the IDF and the Israeli state, is insane, and it is statistically inaccurate. Firstly, because Hamas only came about in 1987. That's 40 years. That's almost 40 years after the creation of the Israeli state. That's 40 years of Israel settling and expanding into Palestinian land and brutalizing and terrorizing Palestinian people. In those 40 years, the Palestinian people had attempted to reach political agreement. They had attempted to reach negotiations, and people keep saying, well, Hamas shouldn't be in operation because we should be reaching a peaceful political agreement. There should be a peaceful political avenue. What peaceful political avenue are you talking about? It was 40 years of back and forth of being brutalized and being terrorized until Hamas came into creation. The point at which Hamas was created, the Palestinian people had already exhausted all political avenues. And I say this again, if tomorrow Hamas are annihilated, what becomes of the Palestinian cause? What becomes of the Palestinian cause for liberation? Because we've seen already that peaceful protesting, that peaceful lobbying, that political lobbying has not worked and is continuing to not work. Israel, who cannot even adhere to the very terms of their own creation, who cannot even honor the borders that saw their creation, you think they're the ones that are going to be wanting to do peaceful negotiations? None of this was fair from the beginning. From the very beginning, when the Brits said to the Palestinians that, hey, we'll honor your independence if you oust the Ottoman Empire, the Palestinians did the heavy work. They bore the brunt of that expulsion of the Ottomans. It was their cost, right? And it should be their independence. We need to sit and we need to think what the Palestinian people have actually gone through from the past century. Whether it is the British people lying to them and then taking their land and making them a Palestinian colony, to then administrating land that does not even belong to the Brits. This idea of peaceful negotiation is a fallacy at this point. It doesn't exist.
It would be nice and ideal, but they've tried.
This is a 75-year history.
And again, this is not in any way condoning killing of innocent civilians. It's more like...
It's the reality of occupation, and it's the reality of revolution, and it's the reality of liberation. There's this thing called the dynamics of asymmetric conflicts, right? There are a number of kind of war historians, really, that have spoken about this. And it's the dynamics of asymmetric conflict is basically this idea that it's in the context of colonial history and colonial theory, where the colonizer so far outweighs the power of the colonized that the colonized therefore has no other means to resist other than violence. And we see that. To speak further on this idea, this fallacy of this symmetry between Hamas and the Palestinian forces versus Israel, to give you guys a little bit of context, and once again, this is fact, Israel has the 15th largest military spending in the world. They have one of the most sophisticated military defenses and military equipment in the world. They are currently recipient of $3.8 billion in military aid from the US a year. With this recent war, the US have pledged a further $8 billion. By the way, that's why we cannot call it a conflict, where one side is disproportionately much more powerful than the other side. You cannot call that a conflict. Not only do Israel have billions and billions and billions pounds more to spend on the military, not do they have a far more sophisticated and resourceful military than any Palestinian force, whether it's Hamas or not. What people don't realize as well when they're talking about this symmetry is that Gaza in particular is not a state. These are not state actors. When we think about war, we're thinking about state actors. We're thinking about one country in war with another country. That is not what is happening here. Gaza is not a country. Gaza is a prison. Gaza is a 1,400 square mile territory that is blocked off from every single entry and exit point that you can possibly imagine, that where there is no, and I repeat, no freedom of movement, no entry of anything without Israeli permission. That is not a state actor. That is people fighting for their own independence. And we can all sit here and bemoan Hamas, and we really truly have. But what then?
The thing is as well, like you just said about how massive Israel's military spending is, how much their resources are. I mean, as well, this isn't to suggest anything. I'm just saying I myself am also shocked that what happened on the 7th of October was even able to happen, considering like the amount.
Do you know what it is? And do you know what's crazy as well? Like, and once again, like, this is not to condone anything that Hamas have done, but speaking factually, Israel, when they attacked, they have sophisticated fighter jets. Hamas, when they attacked, they were using hand gliders. They were using hand gliders. Like the visible difference in capability and resource is crazy. It's crazy. Not to condone what they've done, but it's crazy.
Yeah, but it's like also now we're in this situation where obviously as of the 14th of October, I believe it was yesterday, Israel has told 1.1 million civilians in North Gaza that they need to evacuate and go to southern Gaza within 24 hours.
That really compounds this idea of this asymmetry, right? Hamas did what they did. 1,300 people dead. There's no way to justify that. Cool. Israel now. The death toll of Gazans is, I think, at 2,000 last time I checked, nearly at 2,000, with over 500 of them being children. They have also completely cut off electricity, water, food to this place. They are literally bombing densely populated civilian areas. They're bombing hospitals, they're bombing ambulance convoys. There have been a number of humanitarian workers that have been killed, a number of journalists that have been killed who are attempting to report live from the Gaza Strip, and they have yesterday or the day before said to 1.1 million Gazans in the north of Gaza evacuate to the south in 24 hours. The UN have said this will lead to
humanitarian disaster.
Disaster. That's the quote unquote. That's they're saying the UN humanitarian disaster. And by the way, not that it's just impossible, but however many of the Gazans that then actually did try to make that flee, Israelis then bombed them on their way. They told the Gazans, leave the north, move to the south, and as these people are going to the south, they're being bombed.
Exactly. It's like, even if you were to ever think, okay, this is a viable option, you would expect, okay, maybe for those 24 hours it's a ceasefire or whatever. It's like, and
the way that the media are reporting on this, the kind of rhetoric that has been coming out is absolutely disgusting. I'm talking about Israeli leaders coming out and saying, we're going to annihilate the Palestinians. They've called them human animals. Bearing in mind, 50% of who they're talking about are children. They're calling them human animals. We've seen history repeat itself over and over and over again. Was it not the Jewish people that were referred to in exactly the same way as cockroaches and rodents that then mandated, that created a public appetite for the Holocaust? Is that not exactly how that happened? To make no mistakes about it, to come forth on a global stage and call a population of people human animals, what you are doing is stripping them of their humanity. You are dehumanizing them so as to mandate and make space for their annihilation, for their genocide, because these are not human beings.
We are also seeing as well both high members of the Israeli state and also the Western media implying that Palestinians basically equate to Hamas. Literally, their own president was quote unquote said, it's not true, this rhetoric about civilians not being aware, not involved. It's absolutely not true. They could have risen up, they could have fought against that evil regime that took over Gaza.
My friend, you are the evil regime. They can't even fight against you. You're asking us to fight against Hamas.
It is just quite ironic. I was like, oh, they could have risen up against it.
No, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this concept of civilian, right? Because the Western media have allowed for this Israeli leader to come on this global stage and call Palestinians human animals. They're not civilians. They're not worthy of the sanctity of life. They are not worthy of protection. They're not worthy of any aid. Why? Because they belong to the land that Hamas operates, right? So let's talk about this concept of what a civilian actually is and how to actually apply it to this situation. As we've said, more than 50% of Gazans currently are under 18. 42% of them are under 14 years old. These are not the ones that are up in arms. These kids are not the ones that are up in arms. And yet they're the ones that are conflated with Hamas. These children are the ones that are supposed to be Hamas. However, over in Israel, they have mandatory conscription, right? Which is basically every adult has to serve in the Israeli military, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, unless you're a conscientious objector, in which case you get put to jail. Regardless, the vast majority of Israeli adults either are currently or have served in the Israeli military. Are they then not veterans?
From that perspective, though, while you said if they're conscientious objector, they go to jail, are we like then grouping them though? Like, because obviously if it's like jail or you commit these atrocious acts, can we expect all of them to conscientiously
absolutely
object?
Because it's not just like it's not a military that's just kind of like, you know, benignly working. And this is another thing that I wanted to bring up, right, is when we talk about the kind of reality of the Israeli people and the reality of the Palestinian people, it's the Palestinians that are presented to be terrorists. They're the ones that are seen to be conflated and aligned with Hamas, which is obviously factually completely incorrect. But it's the Israelis, it's their everyday life is predicated and sustained by this absolutely disgusting, abhorrent, violent apparatus of apartheid and genocide, right? So to kind of make out as though like there's any integrity to going and fighting in the IDF or living in Israel, even though you might not necessarily agree with it, it's ridiculous, because it's not just that the IDF is kind of, oh, they're a neutral evil. No, they are what is going on in Palestine right now is one of the most brutal and one of the most persevering examples of imperialism and genocide that history has ever seen, statistically speaking, right? So for those Israelis who are living in the land of Israel, under the state of Israel, who are serving in the Israeli Defense Forces, who then want to turn around and be like, no, we're completely innocent, and even in some instances distance themselves from the actions of the Israeli state, how are you going to do that when the everydayness of your life, the kind of everyday quality of your life is literally predicated on the systematic genocide of the Palestinian people? That's a logical conundrum you cannot reconcile.
And again, we're not saying that these people
that they should then be killed. We're not saying that.
We're just saying that they can't say that they are completely absolved.
Exactly. We're not saying that then mandates their murder. Absolutely not. But what we're doing is we're discussing the concept of civilian. We're discussing the concept of innocence. Guilt doesn't mean that you should be killed. However, to discuss this concept of innocence within the Israeli demographic, I personally don't see how you could live in the Israeli state, knowing it's a system of apartheid, serving the Israeli forces, knowing that they're literally killing Palestinians en masse, and then try to separate yourself from that.
Well, I think this is the kind of take that the West has been taking on it as well. And actually, it's a little sidebar. How are you feeling about watching Stranger Things season 5?
Oh man, I'm so upset.
Again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with actor Noah Schnapp coming out and saying, my heart breaks for
the civilians. That's fine, yes, of course.
Yeah, but the fact that he ended his statement saying that you either stand with Israel or you stand with terrorism is, in my opinion, is incorrect.
It's incorrect. It's just incorrect, and that's not. No, it's not an opinion. Yeah. It's not an opinion. How do we define terrorism? Sorry, the actual dictionary definition, the internationally legally ratified definition of terrorism is violence to obtain a political means. Is that not exactly what the Israeli state has been predicated on? Is that not exactly what the Israeli state has been sustained on for the past 75 years?
I mean, I imagine with Noah is that obviously he's quite young and he probably hasn't properly actually done. He hasn't listened to Mango Masala on the whole history of it. So.
Well, that's exactly it. I want to talk a little bit now about kind of the reporting of this issue. I've said before how the vast majority of people are opening this book in the middle of the book and are not getting a complete picture, and therefore it's very easy, if all you know of this war, of this issue, is that Hamas have attacked and indiscriminately killed 1,300 Israelis, and you don't know anything else, you don't know the history, you don't know the context, you're going to think that the Palestinians are the bad guys. And the media is taking advantage of this. Now, I'm going to be completely honest here. What we're seeing now is weaponized Islamophobia. To kind of break this down, I've spoken about how Israel have called Palestinians human animals, and it's a sentiment that has been reiterated basically by the vast majority of Western leaders. I think, in fact, maybe all Western leaders, save like Ireland. And you know, all the Western leaders are coming forward and saying, you know, we stand with Israel, we support, and this is what is so funny, we support Israel's right to defend itself.
I mean, literally, if you scroll back on our Instagram, this is literally the conversation that we had 2 years ago about why that's
exactly it's not true.
It is an inane statement.
Exactly. But that's the line that's being fed to everyone, and everybody is believing it. Why? Because the West already have a very sturdy laurel to rest on when it comes to Islamophobia.
Just to provide quick context as well, in case you haven't seen that clip, what we are saying is that it's what we were discussing before about this complete asymmetry between these two forces.
And also the history of the context. Like, to say that Israel is the one acting in self-defense is wrong, because they the ones that created this war. They are the people who completely dishonored any agreements of their creation. They are the ones who have been expanding into Palestinian territory. They are the ones who have enacted a genocide, settler colonialism, apartheid. Palestinians are the ones that are resisting. They are the ones that have the right to defend themselves, because they are the victims in this. Listen to this. Hamas did what they did, right? And that's it. They can't touch Israel anymore. They did what they did, and they expended all their efforts, all their resources. They're still fighting, but they can't touch Israel. Israel, within 24 hours, have blocked electricity, have blocked power, have blocked internet, have blocked food, have blocked water, have blocked any international aid going in and out of Gaza. And is that what you call symmetry?
Yeah, exactly. It's like what happened on the 7th of October should have received the attention that it got, because obviously civilian lives have been lost. It's a tragedy. But what we've seen in the week afterwards, I don't know. I mean, obviously, I think you kind of avoid the news a bit more than I do. But from what I've been seeing, every single headline has been about so and so has happened to Israel, or even the distinguishment between so many Israelis killed, so many Palestinians
have died.
Or dead.
Right, exactly. So this is what I was talking about. I was talking about this media presentation of what's going on, you know, with this war, where there have been obviously decades of Islamophobia that has now reached kind of a global level, and the West are really relying on that, and we see that in the way that they're reporting on these crimes. They're literally using racist, Islamophobic, anti-Arab tropes to basically peddle lies. Actual lies, guys. So there basically was these widespread claims that in the 7th of October attacks, Hamas were, trigger warning, sexual violence, that Hamas were basically raping Israeli women en masse. That statement has since been established to be unsubstantiated. There's no materiality to it. No one can prove it. There have been no credible sources that have said that. There have also been a story where apparently, once again, extreme violence I'm going to be talking about here, guys, that Hamas have basically ripped open the belly of a pregnant woman. This is actually a story that happened to a Palestinian woman at the hands of Israeli forces. And now this is being peddled as a tragedy onto the Israeli people.
I mean, that is just like the peak.
That is just, you say it's peak, but it continues, guys. President Biden, arguably the most powerful leader in the world, of the most powerful state in the world, has reported to have seen images and videos of Hamas apparently beheading children.
Exactly. It wasn't even the fact that he came out and said like,
I've heard,
they've done this. It's like,
I've seen it. He said, I have seen it. And guess what? It was the IDF themselves that then turned around and said it was a lie. This did not happen.
Yeah, the White House had to come out and retract the statement.
But can you imagine they had not come forward and said that this was a lie, and that lie would have been peddled to the rest of the world. It would have infuriated the world, and it would therefore have mandated and sustained the continued killing of Palestinians.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, even as someone myself who firmly stands with Palestinian liberation, and I think what Israel is currently doing in retaliation, or has been doing, is horrific. The fact that these stories have come out, and the fact that there's so much out there, photos circulating of like blurred pictures, even after I've seen multiple infographics stating that the beheading of babies, for example, and that is false. I'm still struggling to, like, even now I'm like, oh, well,
trying to shake that off, because
no, but I'm also like, well, should I be saying like, well, it hasn't been confirmed, because like, do you know what I mean? Because like the fact that it's come out in the first place, but I'm like,
because that is such a uniquely harrowing thing, to behead babies. It's like if you said to someone, what is literally the most inhumane violence, like depraved thing you can possibly think of,
taking advantage of the most innocent life,
and that's, and not just that, in the most violent way, to behead babies. You know, it's just so absurd. It's so absurd, but it's something that they know that is going to really
trigger emotional response.
Exactly. And it's a complete lie. And we only know that now because of the way that social media circulates news. Can you imagine how many more lies have been told about the Palestinian people en masse, and as a result have allowed for the killing? And that's not it, by the way. That's not even the full picture. There was one particular story of a German girl who was kind of taken and apparently massacred and raped at the music festival that got attacked. She's alive. Not only is she alive, she's being treated in a Gazan hospital by Hamas. And this is not even the worst of it now. This is not even the worst of it. Not only is Western media now, presenting these lies about Palestine, they're now even reappropriating, they're hijacking the Palestinian plight itself. I have seen numerous celebrities using pictures of what is essentially Palestinian suffering and claiming it to be. So like Justin Bieber made a post. One of the most influential celebrities in the world has made a post, stand with Israel, and the background is a photo of Gaza that has been bombed to the ground. It's Gaza that has been bombed to the ground, and they're pretending that's Israel. Jamie Lee Curtis posted a picture of Palestinian children pretending that is Israeli children saying terror from the skies. It's basically Palestinian children looking up at the missiles being dropped on them, basically.
Well, I don't think she pretended. I think what's happened here is she posted that picture like, oh, this is terrible. The thing is,
not pretended. Under the guise of.
But the thing is, she then was told those are actually Palestinian children.
And she kept it on.
No, she didn't. No, she didn't. I think she deleted it.
Oh, did she delete it? I thought she kept it on.
It's worse, because she's like, literally, the moment someone tells you it's Palestinian children.
And the thing is that it was that image that was evoking a certain response, right? It was the image that was, forget the conflict, forget the history, forget the politics. It's that very image, because it's true. No matter what side you stand on, innocent children to be having to look up at missiles being dropped on them is, in any belief system, under any ideology, under any politics, is just completely abhorrent and disgusting and heartbreaking. But that's the case. That's exactly what that image conveys. It conveys that children are being looked up at missiles that are being dropped on them, except they are Palestinian children. So what, are they not worthy of sanctification? Are their lives not matter? Just
checked. The photo's been deleted. Surely if
if that's the image that you've seen and it's disgusting to you, why is it because it's not Israel you can't come forward and say it? Because it's true, it's happening to Palestinian people. It doesn't matter what you feel about Palestine, it's happening to Palestinian children. That's a fact. You've seen it with your own eyes, but you won't post it and you won't stand for them because
you're, whatever reason it is.
So this is really the kind of political landscape that we're dealing with. This is really the kind of the reality of the situation that we're dealing with.
Have you seen, obviously, again, to point out this asymmetry, of, like, in terms of resources, have you seen Israel and the adverts?
Oh, don't even.
Israel has been placing adverts. I don't know how they've managed to pay YouTube to get this done.
Oh, come
on. But basically, they've placed adverts on videos that are meant for kids, so that obviously the advert will come up and it's basically obviously again a load of emotive language. I think it actually references the 40 babies actually.
It literally says just like you do anything to protect your children, we do anything to protect ours. Stand with the IDF.
Yeah, it's like we know that your kid can't read this, but you can, so hug your baby and stand with us.
It's just the most abhorrent propaganda that I literally saw that and I thought, like, is this an episode of Black Mirror? I cannot fathom that this is actually where we're at right now. But it's not just to talk about the kind of asymmetry in the violence and the oppression that have been faced by the Palestinians for the past 75 years. it's now that even in the coverage of it, there's no justice for them.
I mean, even like talking about the British response to this on both sides, I've been quite
I can't engage. You know what? I'm not voting in the next election. Wallahi, I'm not voting in the next election. Like, this for me has completely radicalized me. It has completely radicalized me. Like, for those of you, I'm going to give a little bit of personal context. Like, the Israeli occupation of Palestine was one of the first political kind of causes that radicalized me as a child. I actually looked on my social media the other day, and the first post I made about free Palestine was over 12 years ago, in 2011, when I was 14 years old. And it's for the past 12 plus years, I've been living life and I've experienced so much of life, and Palestine remains under occupation. And it's now at a point where I denounce, I am, as a British citizen, I denounce our government. They do not represent me, and I'm not voting.
Do you not think that we need to vote for the lesser of two evils, the one that has the most potential for then change to be operated through?
I do not see any difference. I do not see, at this point, I do not see any difference between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, and ultimately something as this, which is like foundational, right? Like an issue like this is points to very foundational cause and foundational beliefs, right? And by the way, like, don't get it wrong, even though, you know, this is a distinctly Palestinian cause, and that includes Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Jews, Palestinian atheists. By the way, people think it's just Muslims. It includes all of those groups of people. The kind of rhetoric has surrounded around kind of Muslims versus Jews, Arabs versus Israelis. And as I said, the West and Israel have weaponized Islamophobia, right? So the Muslim world is having a very different reaction to this, I think, than maybe non-Muslim people are, because we can see it, and we can see that there is a certain treatment of the Palestinian people that is allowed to happen by the rest of the world, precisely because they are majority Muslim, you know? So for me as a Muslim, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, the government that is supposed to represent me does not, this part of my identity renders me worthless to them.
For context as well, if you haven't seen what's happened, so in terms of both the our government and the opposition, our government has very firmly, quote unquote, stood with Israel to the point of obviously offering aid and support,
yep,
and like obviously brandishing Israel's flag everywhere, and then obviously what's been, for me personally, more disappointing has been the opposition when interviewed. Both Keir Starmer and I think it's Emily Thornberry refused to actively condemn the actual definition of war crime, yep, that Israel has committed.
They did not. Keir Starmer didn't just fail to condemn, he supported it. He said,
they have the rights.
He said Israel has a right to defend itself. Then the reporter asked him, even though that means cutting off food and supplies and electricity, he says, I think Israel should be able to defend themselves. Gave a very politician's answer, but essentially said, I believe they should be able to defend themselves.
But in collective punishment, as it's called, is literally,
yes, it's a war crime,
recognized as a war crime. And it is just sad, because I do think that the reason why Keir Starmer and Emily Thornberry are probably acting the way they're doing is because they're so conscious of the fact that anti-Semitism has been a problem within the Labour Party before, and they're so...
No, I think that's giving them too much credit. Keir Starmer has never, in my opinion, had any political integrity. He has never, ever, ever had any integrity as a politician, as a man with any Labour ideals. I don't think this is simply because he's walking around yellow tape or red tape. He is very firmly on that side of history. He ideologically believes in what is going on here.
I just don't understand how
you could be a human rights lawyer.
He literally knows that that's a war
It's a facade
crime,
of Western liberalism, though. That's exactly what this is, and that's exactly what this is showing, which is another thing that is coming out of this war. The facade of Western liberalism. The same people who will tout liberty and equality and freedom for all, academics as well, journalists who will, look back on the horrors of colonialism and be like, that was a harrowing time, that should never have happened, will now come forward and say, poor Israel, they have a right to defend themselves. it's ideologically contradictory. It doesn't make any sense.
No.
You know, it's so harrowing, because what we're seeing now is a genocide in real time. People sit there, and when we discuss the past, we say like, oh my God, how was empire allowed to happen? How was apartheid in South Africa allowed to happen? How was the Holocaust allowed to happen? This is exactly how. This is exactly how people, the media class, like absolutely brainwashing people allowing their fears to be weaponized, allowing themselves to hate and to stereotype a whole group of people to the point of dehumanization that then mandates their extinction. The same way that people are talking about the Palestinians, do you not think they was talking about the Jewish people like that back in the Holocaust times? And I say that not just as a rhetoric. This is not a customary invocation of pathos on my behalf. I'm talking about actual look at the history of it. When they're referring to them as vermin and animals, that's exactly the tactic that was used by Nazis. Exactly the tactic that was used by Nazis to present the Palestinian Liberation Forces, whether that's Hamas or otherwise, as terrorists. Was it not Nelson Mandela that was on the US's terrorist list? He was. It's a fact.
In prison for like what, 27
years. They criminalized a man for 27 years, and at the end of it, when he had in fact, you know, helped to win this victory, then they celebrated him. And that's exactly what's going on. And for me personally, like, I have been like, it's not even about me. I have been absolutely beside myself this past week looking at the coverage. Every single time I'm logging on, it's something else. Israel have launched a complete indiscriminate attack on the Gaza Strip and Palestinians at large from every single angle and every single way, with the full backing of the majority of Western leaders in the world, and they are not looking to slow down anytime soon.
This is the thing, like, the response that would have been ideal, in my opinion, from West would have been, this has happened to Israel. Okay, our deepest sympathies of what's happened. We will obviously help you in whatever way you actually need in order to essentially bring justice to the people that have actually done this.
That's not...
But this would be ideal.
Yeah.
But also, let's have a think about why this has happened, and we've all kind of been ignoring it for the past 60, 70 years. Maybe this is a sign that we probably do need to rethink this.
Yeah, look, listen, make no qualms about this, and this is maybe like the last big final thing that I want to say on this topic. Make no qualms about this fallacy of Western intervention and Western interventionism. It is an absolute farce. The same country that created Israel, that backstabbed the Palestinian people, that made Palestine a colony when I'm talking about Britain, by the way, the same Britain that made Palestine a colony when they said they would give their freedom, that then gave away Palestinian land without actually consulting or ratifying things from the Palestinian people, that then continues to this day arm and have diplomatic relationships with Israel. They will not be the people to stop Israel. The same United States of America that sends currently $3.8 billion in aid to Israel, they will not be the one to stop Israel.
Because it's not just even within Israel and Palestine that Israel is carrying out this sort of thing, is it? It's like all over the Middle East, even in like South America as well, isn't it?
Yep. Israel, as I said, you know, they supported and aided the Indian occupation of Kashmir. They aided the South African apartheid. They were the ones that supported ISIS in Syria. Like, you know, when people keep conflating like Hamas with like Islamist terrorism, which, okay, yes, admittedly over the years it has leaned into those kind of ideologies, but that's not the genealogy of Hamas. That's not where Hamas started from. And people keep saying Hamas is ISIS, ergo Palestine is ISIS. My friend, it was Israel that was backing ISIS and arming ISIS in Syria.
Didn't Hamas hate ISIS, or they didn't like each other? They
fought. Yeah. Exactly. Like it's there's so many myths, and I want to talk about this idea of Western interventionism. Why? Because Israel is a Western creation, right? And this is where the the conversation is very deep, and I'm not going to say I have all of the answers. I don't, but I have a number of contemplations. Okay, people think that this issue is kind of like a Muslim versus Jewish issue and an Arab versus Israeli issue and blah. That's what it's been made to be. Actually, if you look theologically, right, say for example this Jewish belief of the right to the Jewish homeland, right? No Muslim would ever contest that. In fact, as a Muslim, and I speak as a Muslim now, I believe it's even my duty to uphold the religious rights and the religious freedoms and the religious beliefs of particularly the Jewish people. Why? Because the Quran bears witness to Judaism. Islam bears witness. Islam comes forth from Judaism, right? In Islam, we believe that Jewish people and Christian people, they're people of the book. In the Day of Judgment, they'll stand in the line with us, right? So this is not a Islam versus Judaism. More time I say, they're even like we're all in the same region, innit? Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to say we're all the same thing because we're not, but like,
we're derived from the Abrahamic
we
religion,
prop each other up.
Yeah.
We prop each other up, right? So, it's as a Muslim, it's even my Muslim duty, to aid and help kind of my Jewish brothers and sisters. So insofar as there's this Jewish belief of, okay, we need a homeland for ourselves, completely sympathize with that. In fact, there's actual images of like pre-1948 when Jewish people were coming to Palestine, and the Palestinian people were arriving on a ship, and the Palestinian people were welcoming them. Like Palestinians and Jewish people have lived peacefully on that land, for millennia, and particularly in the 19th century and the 20th century, before the creation of Israel, there were increasing amounts of Jewish people who were returning to Palestinian land, and they were accepted. They were completely accepted. So to say that it has to be either a Jewish homeland or a Palestinian homeland, and they're completely mutually exclusive, is wrong. It's inaccurate. I say as a Muslim, it's Islamically enshrined for us to honor that kind of that Jewish belief and that Jewish practice first and foremost. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of Jewish people being native to this land, right? Essentially the kind of Israeli stance and the Zionist stance is that, the Palestinians were there because of conquest, and the Israelis are actually the ones who are really indigenous to this land, right? So I've already debunked the myth that Palestinians came as a result of Arab conquest. I've already said that there are a number of Palestinians who actually converted to Islam, and they were themselves descended from Jewish people. Actually, another myth-busting thing is regarding the Jewish diaspora, where people say that all Jewish people are descended from those who came from the Jewish kingdoms of Canaan. It's not true. A large part of the Jewish diaspora today exists because of mass conversions to Judaism across Europe and North Africa, i.e. they are European/North African people with European and North African ancestry who then converted to Judaism. And the bit that's tricky and the blurred lines and the grey area is because Judaism is an ethno-religion where you can convert your religion. You can't really convert your ethnicity, but that happens by default when you convert to Judaism because it's considered an ethno religion. I remember like a few months ago I was watching Jewish matchmaking because I love reality shows, and I kind of love that kind of stuff, and I was watching it, the show is basically set in Israel and across the Jewish diaspora, largely in America. And I was looking, I'm seeing like the kind of Jewish demographic, and they're all Jewish people. They're all living in Israel, and it's so funny because obviously it's a show about setting up Jewish people to marry each other. So they'd meet and they'd always have conversations about where you from, where blah 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 blah, and it's always like, oh, where do you live in Israel? I live in so and so part. Oh, where are you from originally? Philadelphia. And it's like, oh, I moved to Israel from Morocco. Oh, I moved to Israel from Libya. Oh, I moved to Israel from Hungary. Like that's the kind of actual demographic makeup of Israel today. You see it when you look at Israeli people because they're not a monolithic. They do not have a monolithic phenotype. You know why? Because they belong to various ethnicities. If we think of like ethnicity in the historically produced context, right? Ethnicity and race are historically produced contexts. That means they are produced by certain political governing structures that decide like this is how we're going to stratify people, so for ease of government, right? That is what ethnicity is. You can look at one Jewish person, they've got blonde hair, blue eyes, very white skin. Then you look at another Jewish person, they've got brown skin, black hair, black eyes, you know? And you telling me they're the same ethnicity, because racialization and making ethnicity is a visual exercise, by the way. Are you telling me they're the same ethnicity? I don't think they are. You know, so that's what's really, really, really tricky. It's this idea of indigeneity. It's this idea that actually all Jewish people are indigenous to, you know, Israel. Is factually incorrect because of, you know, as I said, Palestinians have also descended from the Jewish people, and that actually a lot of Jewish diaspora comes from conversions. But also then there's this whole conversations about ethnicity in general and how we construct ethnicity, because ethnicity, as I say, is a historically produced construct that then changes across time, right? Based on where you are and the kind of exposures that you have. And we see proof of this when we consider, for example, Yiddish, which is a Jewish language, which actually is formed from Hebrew and other Germanic languages, right? That's a uniquely European, like, construct, you know? So to kind of ignore that cultural exchange and the creation of ethnicity following the expulsion of Jewish people from the historic land of Canaan is intellectually dishonest. To put a blanket ethnicity on all Jewish people and say you are all Jewish simply because that's your faith system and therefore that becomes your ethnicity, to me, that doesn't make any sense, right? We can honor the religious claim, absolutely we can, but the ethnic claim, the claim of indigeneity, that's the bit that's very, very grey area. That's the bit that doesn't really stand up. Actually, kind of when you look at Jewish kind of demographics today, the way they're stratified themselves is through the geographical locations, and really what I think this is ethnicity. When people say they're either Ashkenazi Jew, which is like European, largely Eastern European, or Sephardic Jew, which is you know, Portugal, Spain, North Africa, they see it as like just a stratification of internal Jewish population. I see that as ethnicity, because you look at them and they look completely different to each other. If you've been in a certain land for 2,000 years, your language, your food, your cultures, your everything that constitutes an ethnicity has now been influenced by this geographical spatial context. How is that then not your ethnicity? You know? And to kind of say that because this percentage of the Jewish diaspora have descendants that have come historically from the land of Canaan, therefore all Jewish people now have access to, you know, this right of return. What that logic basically then says that all of us who have any kind of ancestry from any other place, we then have claim to that land, right? Bearing in mind, what we're talking about is ethnicity in the context of a modern world with modern borders and modern notions of citizenship. The world as we know it now, with this is the Palestine border, this is the Israel border, this is the UK border, this is the Bangladesh border. The world did not exist like that back in the days. It was kingdoms and it was tribes, and that's how it was. So there's even a conundrum there in trying to basically pick up a tribe who historically they didn't even have a border themselves and now put them within a border in a modern world where borders are colonial continuities that are less than 1 century old, right? So as I say, it's not factually correct to say that they're all descended from this, but also we now have to consider how ethnicity is historically produced and how that changes, and how that then changes the claim of indigeneity. Because if the claim of indigeneity is simply because, oh, I'm Jewish and that's the Jewish homeland, that doesn't run. Why? Because all of us over 2,000 years are products of the ebbing and flowing of various empires and the lending and giving to various empires. You know, if that works, then I have a claim to Iran, you know, because that's Bangladesh somewhere along the line has kind of ancestry from Iran. You know, the Romani people have a claim to South Asia have a claim to Iran and Uzbekistan and, you know, like parts of Africa. The Brits have a claim to Denmark. You cannot simply kind of apply and mold modern borders in that way. It doesn't work like that, you know. So to talk about this claim of indigeneity, I don't personally think it's right or fair to honor it on that basis. The religious claim, absolutely, I think, should be honored. Every single person in this world has a right to practice their religious faith as they believe. And if the Jewish people say that is historically our homeland, that's where we want to live, that's where we want to, practice our religion, they should be allowed to do that. And the UN could have done that. The UN could have made them like a protected, a protected tribe or whatever, like a protected demographic. And by the way, Jewish people have always had the right to immigrate in and out of and live in Palestine as Jewish people. They've always had that right. But to then make it a violent nation state that is predicated on apartheid, on settler colonialism, that's the bit that's not acceptable. That's actually the bit that's not even necessary to practice the Jewish belief of right to homeland, to displace, millions of people, to maim and kill however many more in the name of a Jewish homeland. It's not necessary. The Jewish people did not need the existence of the IDF and the settler colonialism and the occupied territories of Palestine in order to practice their right to, return to their homeland. That is a Western construct. That was the British saying, we're going to put you here because we've now forced, we actually tricked the Palestinians into controlling it. Listen, I'll tell you something. When we're talking about kind of Western intervention and Western kind of presentation of this issue, obviously, as I've mentioned, they weaponize Islamophobia because the world already believes that Muslims are terrorists. The world already believes that Muslims are barbaric. The world already believes that Muslims are bad people, and therefore it doesn't take much for the West to convince them that therefore Palestinians are like this. The last time the kind of Western world lied on a Muslim country and a large Muslim population like this in the same way was in 2003, when they lied about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction, which then was the grounds on which the Iraq invasion was mandated, which then led to a war that then killed 1 million Iraqis, right? And we know now that that was a lie. The grounds on which they waged that war that killed 1 million Iraqis was falsified. Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. And it's the same exact thing that I'm seeing happening here, where they're making up lies about Palestinians, raping, beheading, doing this, that, and the other. Why? Because it mandates more of an invasion. It mandates the annihilation, the destabilization of the Palestinian people. Why? For Western political power. We know why. Why did they do that in Iraq? It's not just because they felt like killing 1 million Iraqis. For them, it was collateral. Why? Because they wanted regional power. They wanted regional control. They destabilized the entire region so as to put themselves in there as the governing authority. I
was thinking this. Do you think that's why Britain was so obviously, like you said, at the beginning of the 20th century, they were saying to Palestine, oh, actually, you can have this back if you kick out Ottoman Empire. And then actually they're like, hang on, if we do that, then we don't actually have a leg in this area.
They never meant it. They never meant it. When they said to the Palestinians, if you kick out the Ottomans, we'll honor your independence, what they were doing was they were getting the Palestinians to do the heavy work for them because they wanted the Ottomans out. They wanted control of that land, but they didn't want to waste the manpower and the resources and the money to do it themselves. They just got the native population to do it for them.
Do you feel like that's probably why they were so involved in obviously the creation of the Israeli state as well, in terms of wanting to still have power and a claim in that area of the world?
Guys, we cannot separate this conflict from the history of empire. The point at which Israel was created, it was allowed to be created, and it was kind of supported by the British people, and the reason why they had that power was because they made Palestine a colony. Why? Because it was the age of empire. It was a part of the British Empire. We cannot divorce Palestine as a nation state, Israel as a nation state, from that history of empire. And if there's one thing we know, empire was all about power. Empire was all about control. Empire was all about capitalism, and that's the genealogy of this issue. You trace it back far enough, that's what this is about. Right? The creation of Israel as a nation state, not the Jewish right to return. That's their sanctified religious belief that I uphold as a Muslim. But the creation of Israel as a nation state, that's the reality of what's going on. Yeah. It's Western political gain. And the Palestinians are collateral the same way that 1 million Iraqis were collateral 20 years ago.
It is interesting as well, just as probably a final point of how we see the continuation of various restrictions in free speech and autonomy that we've been seeing in the UK.
Oh, absolutely.
This is now played into this. Like I said, obviously we've seen mass illuminations of the Israeli flag on various buildings around the world, including the UK, like flags being hoisted, etc., of the Israeli flag. Yet, I believe it was in Manchester that a young man was actually,
someone I know was there, and she recorded it and she put it in a story, and I spoke to her about it, and essentially it was a pro-Israel protest. There was a young man who was waving the Palestinian flag. He was not agitating anyone, he was not provoking anything, he was not violent in any way. He was simply a symbol of that Palestinian resistance, which according to free speech in this country we should be allowed to do. He was arrested. He was put into the back of the van there was obviously a number of people who were kind of questioning the police, why are you doing this? And they were saying that he's disrupting peace or whatever. There was another man, this girl that I know who was there, she said that there was another guy there who was wearing the kufiya, which is the Palestinian like national scarf, and the police said to him, take it off. Like, this man is just wearing his like national dress and the police are telling him take it off. Suella Braverman, apparently, I don't know if this is actually passed or not, is apparently looking to...
Yeah, it hasn't passed yet.
Yeah, criminalise the waving of the Palestinian flag. This country that is so up in arms about free speech, when they're talking about racism and Islamophobia and all this right-wing rhetoric, all of a sudden they are such heavy and ardent custodians of free speech, right? And free speech is the marker of civilization. Where is your free speech now? Make no mistakes about this. What happened to that boy? And I say this because I've seen it with my eyes and I've verified it with eyewitness testimony. What happened to that boy is fascism. It is fascism. To suppress an identity, to suppress a political freedom to express your belief is fascism. The fact that the Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, is trying to pass a law that illegalizes an identity, an entire identity. She's essentially criminalizing Palestinians, an identity. That is fascism. And if that comes to pass, the UK will absolutely formally be known to be a fascist state. That's not an opinion, that's a fact.
I would say surely that's not going to happen, but but
it doesn't even need to be ratified or enshrined in actual like constitutional law when the police are already exercising their powers to tell someone take off your anything that identifies you as Palestine.
Yeah.
That's already fascism, whether it's enshrined or not. That's already fascism.
The scarf and the flag, if you've got them, it's your own identity, free speech, whatever. If, I'm not saying this was the case, but if, say, the person who's waving the flag was, because it depends as well in terms of the actual protest. If it was a protest in, like, I stand with Israel, then fair enough. If it was, like, say, like, a visual for those that died, then I would maybe understand if you were, like, waving the flag and chanting.
Oh, yeah, no, it wasn't a visual.
That I would understand.
It was pro-Israel protest, basically. Like, and like, it's not just the guy who was waving the flag, it's the stander-by who came to question the police who's wearing the kufiya who got told take it off. For what reason? Other than fascism, you're suppressing an identity, you're suppressing the right to express your belief. It's fascism. And that's where we're at, guys. That's where we're at. Obviously, for those who have sat here and listened to this video, I've tried my best to give a comprehensive and succinct kind of, factual history and analysis of what is going on right now. Obviously, do your own research. I apologize if I've made any mistakes in anything I've said. I've engaged as earnestly and factually accurately as I can, but I am just one person. I'm not an expert. This is something that I've been reading and learning about for the past 12 years of my life. Obviously, everyone do your own research, learn for yourself, and speak up. Speak up. We just kind of spoke then about how we're at a place now where we're facing real life fascism on the street when we're trying to express Palestinian solidarity. For people out there who are listening and who can see what's going on and who can see that this is apartheid and genocide and ethnic cleansing, please keep talking about it, keep sharing it. At a time like this where we can't physically go and help the Palestinian people, the tide of public consensus is a very, very powerful one. And as I always say, it has a horizontal impact. If you can see this for what it is, you can convince others of what it is. You can teach others of what it is. And enough people are exposing this truth. The West, the US, the UK, Israel will not have such a strong facade to hide behind anymore. And therefore, inshallah, there will then be some kind of question into what they're doing and what they're continuing to do. And at the very least, if all we can do is kind of boost and bolster Palestinian morale, then that's what we need to be doing. Everybody needs to be talking about this.
I think it's worth saying as well that we're not asking you to just share an infographic onto your story for the sake of it or anything like that. It doesn't need to be in the form of I'm showing this. It can be having conversations.
That's what I think. That's more important.
Yeah,
that's more important. Share stuff on your social media, of course, because there might be someone who looks and isn't aware, read something that then opens their mind. Absolutely share stuff, but the important thing is have those conversations. Every single not one single one of us is exempt from this conversation. Not one single one of us. It is a humanitarian crisis. It's a crisis of morality. Every single one of us, no matter who you are, where you're from, what you believe, we have a moral duty. We cannot ignore that this is apartheid. This is genocide.
I think as well, like when you think about when stuff like this happened in the past, obviously it's always happening, but this is an example of the whole world is kind of focusing on this right now. Because of social media, people are able to actually like see what's going on. Even obviously now they've like cut the power and stuff, it's obviously going to be a lot harder to, but we're still seeing what's going on. You can still see the injustice. Like there's never been more of a right time to actually like make use of that.
100%. As futile and hopeless as it might all feel sorry, we can't understate the significance of it, like, because there's so much more that they will otherwise get away with. This is absolutely by no means the extent of Israel's depravity. This is absolutely by no means the extent of Israel's capability to annihilate the Palestinian people. I am sitting every single day in absolute trepidation of what is yet to come. To tell 1 million Gazans to evacuate, surely there's something coming. I pray to God that it's not what I think it is, but going off precedent, the Palestinian people, they need our support.
The thing is as well, I saw like some like member of the Israeli defense higher up say casually dropping about nuclear warfare, and I'm just like,
nuclear warfare with who?
Also, you do kind of realize that like if you drop anything there, that's not even just going to affect obviously the Israelis that are settled in Palestine. It's going to affect Israelis in
themselves.
Israel as well.
I don't think it will be nuclear warfare. You know why? Because they don't need nuclear warfare. They already just seismically surpass any military capability that Hamas or any other Palestinian resistant force has. Nuclear warfare would just be it'd be a waste, if anything. They do not need it at this point, so it is my earnest kind of pledge and or plea to everyone out there to really, really learn this history, to not believe what the media tell you, to learn it for yourself, to understand what's going on, and to stand wholeheartedly, unreservedly with the Palestinian people, regardless of whatever attacks have happened in Israel, which once again we categorically cannot condone the loss of any civilian life. But the bigger picture here is that it is not the Israelis that are facing genocide. It is not the Israelis that are facing settler colonialism and apartheid. It's the Palestinians, and that's that is the parameter of this issue. That while we might be able to give certain concessions with smaller events, that meta events, the kind of wider context and the wider parameter and the wider shape of this is that this is an apartheid and a genocide upon the Palestinian people, and every single person should be standing unreservedly with the Palestinian cause. And that doesn't mean Hamas, by the way. That's the Palestinian Liberation Cause. It's separate. As if I had to even clarify that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, 1 hour after we were meant to log off, we are logging off. But I think if there was ever a need to
really sit and
do that, then I think today was the day. if you jumped in at any point in the conversation and thought, hang on, this sounds like biased or whatever, even though I don't think it would have, because everything we're saying
was
is facts.
factual. It's nothing here is my, apart from the reflections at the end.
Yeah.
Nothing has been of my own opinion. It's not an opinion. Everything I've said is facts. I literally spent like 10-15 minutes non-stop reeling off statistics. They speak for themselves.
Yeah. Obviously, praying that for de-escalation, the end of apartheid, and for the liberation of the Palestinian people. At the same time, thoughts are with both the Jewish and Islamic communities around the world that have been affected by this in any way. If it sounds like I'm rushing, it's because I've got 20 seconds left. But yeah, thank you for people that's listening. Hopefully that this has been insightful and factual and has made you think and want to act following this.
Yeah.
Okay, logging off.
Take care, guys.
See you next week. Bye.